Of you. Once again, welcome to Texology Talks. And it has been a great experience over the last 2 months since we have launched this Texology Talks. And myself and my co-founder, Divya Verma, we welcome all of you on board today. And today we have got a very special guest with us. And I'll introduce him a little bit later. But let me talk about the topic today first. So the topic is about thought leadership. Now, I'll not discuss it because Trevor is going to do that, and he's going to tell us in much detail what it really means and how every one of us should today give importance to it, learn about it, and start using it, you know, to expand our horizons and to deliver much beyond our capacities. So that's what he's going to tell us today. How to punch above our weight. That's his punchline. So I'll let him talk, but just giving a brief introduction of Trevor, and then we'll have a very good immersive conversation with him. So Trevor Merriden believes that expertise of clever content. Now that's amazing thing, clever content. Let's understand from him. And he has got a passion to help businesses punch above their weight. So that's his punchline. How to punch above your weight. That's a tremendous thing if we can all achieve that. Creating great issue-based content for companies and boost their visibility in the marketplace. He completes his image as an economist. So he's an economist at the same time. A B2B journalist, editor, and publisher for 20 years. Trevor is also a director of specialist PR firm that grew from £1 million to £2.5 million in 3 years. For the last decade, Trevor has been an entrepreneur in thought leadership and content strategy. That's what we are going to talk today about thought leadership. The ghost in the machine suits best for him as he has been a ghostwriter for most of the world's top corporations. And he specializes in helping them turn the numbers that drive the businesses into compelling stories for buyers, prospects, and influencers. So, joining us today live from Great Britain, Mr. Trevor.
Hello. Hi.
Hi,
Farooq.
how
How
are
are
you doing?
you? I'm very good, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for such a lovely introduction. That was great. I might record that and just replay it at various moments. I was
Definitely.
I was very happy with that.
Yeah. So, Trevor, tell us about what do you mean really by thought leadership?
Well, okay. So, I mean, that's a big presentation as well as in itself. But really, I mean, the term has changed quite a lot over a long period of time. I mean, originally, it was a term used, as far as my research goes, back in the 19th century, you know, when people were talking about enlightened thought leaders, and they were referring at that time over in America to the enlightened people talking about the abolition of the slave trade. I mean, that's the earliest reference I could find. Then in the 1950s, it became a sort of used a term in a magazine called Strategy and Business. And then what happened was that it kind of spread and everybody thought, well, I'll be a thought leader. I can be a thought leader as well. And what was actually thinly disguised sales copy actually was then termed thought leadership. And the whole term became a little bit hackneyed. But my argument that I'll sort of go into more detail in is really around the fact that thought leadership is back with a bang. But it's changed. The nature of it has changed. It's much less about the guru, and it's much more about the way in which you put yourself at the center of the debate, so that anyone, and I know you have a demographic in your audience of young entrepreneurs, is really capable of making the most of their content. As you said, punch above your weight. You've obviously been reading a few of my blogs, so that's fantastic, and just really making the best of the content, because I don't think people really appreciate what they have within them, and also how they use what's within them once it gets outside of them.
Yeah. So what do you mean by thought, and how do you connect it with leadership? So when we call somebody as a thought leader, what exactly
Yeah.
we mean by that?
Well, what that really means is that it's changed, because just as the nature of leadership has changed, and in the old days we used to think of leaders as the sort of, I don't know, to use a Shakespeare analogy, which we tend to use in the UK here, sort of like the Henry V character, sort of raising his sword above his hand and saying, "Follow me, everybody." No, not today, because the nature of leadership has changed. It's more of an enabling leadership, a leadership that says, let's make the best of the people around us. Same with content and thought leadership as well, is that you're basically saying, well, if you're looking to me for all the answers, then you might be waiting a long time. I have some of the answers, but I don't have all of the answers. And if you look at the world's complex problems that are around these days, is that, anybody who says, I have the answer to climate change, or I have the answer to COVID-19, deserves to be treated with our immediate suspicion, because nobody has all the answers to those things. And if you're lucky, you might come across somebody who's got some of the answers, or one of the answers to those things. And so it's about a recognition, thought leadership, that I'm taking us on a journey, and it's more important as a thought leader, and I would say this to all of your audience right now, to be putting yourself at the center of the debate and not worrying too much about whether you have all the answers, which is the old style, with the guru saying, look, I'm the one and only expert on this subject. So it's much more about the collective rather than the individual.
Yeah. So can we say that the debate has moved from being a competitive to being more collaborative?
There is still a lot of competitive out there. Don't get me wrong, but but certainly I would say that there are certain industries, and some of your audience will be involved in technology, where a lot of those cultures are by default collaborative. They've been set up that way. They're young businesses, and they are collaborative in nature. And their default position is collaborate unless there's a very good commercial reason not to with their peers. There are other businesses that traditionally haven't been very collaborative. So you could take the example of retail, a cutthroat, competitive sector. But there's an existential challenge in retail at the moment, which I might mention a little bit later on. And so even in those areas, people, leaders in retail are talking to each other about, well, how do we survive? What is our DNA makeup that we have in order to survive? What do we need from our leadership? So even there, the other thing that's really important about the nature of all this is that you've never been able to get too far away from your customer. You've always wanted to get closer to your customer, but now you have to be razor sharp close to your customer in every way. Thought leadership's a great way of doing that, because you're asking the question as well as giving the answers, and you've got the best possible source of knowledge, that you know immediately what your customers want, because you're asking them through sharing your thoughts and getting their thoughts back in a sort of in a way that is a soft sell, I suppose, but isn't the sort of hard commercial sell. So you're understanding what their challenges and their issues are. I hope this is making some sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So Trevor, tell us that during this pandemic time in 2020, everything was shaken, and all the possibilities that were existing earlier, and the way people were moving ahead in a particular direction, everything is shaken now.
Yeah.
So what has it done to the evolution of thought leaders, the new thought leaders today?
I would say, as with many things, it's accelerated something that was probably already happening. I think that the word collaboration, not just around thought leadership, but in every walk of life, was becoming more used before the pandemic. What's been happening during the pandemic is that the soothsayer who's telling you everything about what's happening in the pandemic, they've made a disappearance. They've made a quick disappearing act, because nobody could have predicted what's been happening in the last year. Well, maybe a few epidemiologists perhaps could have predicted, but we didn't know exactly the dynamics of what was happening. So I would say it's accelerated a change that was already happening. I mean, my business has been benefiting from the kind of renewed interest in thought leadership, and it's a really it's a massive acceleration. And I think the businesses are slowly learning that, you know, one of the best ways of making the most of their marketing budget is to actually pay more attention to their content. When you've got a remote buyer, a buyer that's you can no longer actually go and see and shake hands with, you've got to find other ways to, you know, to impress them and to keep them on board. And you know, and thought leadership is one of those ways. It's not the only way, but it's certainly a central pillar. Also, the nature of thought leadership is that it's a long, if you say, for example, my world is the world of writing, but also, you know, that people, you know, are you know, I've also been writing video scripts, podcasts, all sorts of things that people, you have to be responsive to the way people accept the material. So it's changed a lot in that respect. I'm getting a lot more requests now to change the mode of delivery, if you like, of what I've been doing.
Yeah. So since there is a lot of uncertainty right now in all walks of life, so has the demand for thought leaders increased during these times?
You know, in any time of uncertainty, people are looking for answers, and you know, especially, you know, that people are looking for answers all the time, but the answers have been asked in a slightly more urgent way, and demanded in that way. I I think that that certainly there is a huge demand for knowledge. I think there is a shyness on the supply side sometimes because people are saying it's a time of great uncertainty, you know, and I don't know, I don't know what's happening, so therefore I shouldn't say anything at the moment. And I would say to all of your audience out there that just because things are changing and the situation is fluid, don't think that's a bad time to put your head above the parapet and say things. I think the nature of it is that you should be humble and say, I don't have the answers. That's very important, but you should say, this is my best guess about what's happening. And I think there's no shame in saying that. And if you look back in 6 months and you were completely wrong, you might have been wrong for a good reason, you know. And so, you know, for things, but the important thing is to take people on the journey with you and to put yourself, start a debate. And you don't necessarily have to be the one that finishes the debate.
Exactly. That's so true. So this start is very important, and whatever kind of, you know, the ideas that you can generate, you just throw up the ideas to the audience and let's see what they want to say about it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that's great. Do you want me to just present now, or should we just carry on chatting? What do you want to do?
No, you can start your presentation.
Okay, all right. Okay, what I'll do then is some of the points that we've talked about, I'll skip over those a little bit. I'll refer to them, but I won't take up too much of the audience's time with things that we've already discussed. So now I'm going to try and share my screen, which is where the technology can fail sometimes, but let me see that I can do that. So Farouk, can you tell me that you can see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, that's great. And you should be able to see a thing saying numbers into words. And if you can, then that's a good place to start. So, right. So I'm going to make a start now. So, so really, I mean, Farouk gave me a lovely introduction there, and I'm just so happy to be here talking to, you know, the taxology sort of group about this all the things. So I, as he said, he described me as a sort of, you know, a ghost writer, and I think that's right. I've been like the ghost in the machine, if you like. You know, I've been writing for, you know, for clients, and up until recently, I haven't really actually been talking very much about this subject. I've sort of hid my light under a bushel, if you like. But this is such a subject that's close to my heart, the subject of thought leadership, and and I wanted to share my experience with the good folk of this community. So I'm aware that we have you know, an audience that's, you know, many of which are sort of young entrepreneurs in their 20s and early 30s, and this is what I'm about, is that my passion, as well as my business, is all about putting every business on a fast track to content confidence. That I think that businesses chronically underestimate the amount of content and knowledge they already have. Part of this is to do with confidence. And what I try and do is try and help people get out of them individually and also collectively within businesses what they have to say. I also think that people tend to sometimes treat content as a sort of once-use disposable item, and I think that's a terrible mistake, because a lot of perfectly good content that could be used or reused in lots of different ways never makes it beyond the first use. And what I think the other thing is that a lot of businesses don't actually make it part of their business lives. And so I would say that, that there are ways of bringing content into the everyday. Now, so I would say that that's something that that you should be aware of. I know somebody's drawing on my presentation. I don't know whether you can see that, but that's okay. I don't mind. I'll move on to the next slide. What does thought leadership do? Well, it increases sales. It has proper commercial uses. It retains, helps you retain customers, and it helps you build a brand. That's very important. And I just want to talk about those things. So what I would say is, who am I to actually be talking about? And I describe myself as a ghost in the machine. And don't worry, you're not going to have to look at this for, very much. And I don't do this in thought leadership. I don't sit there and look at things in a broody way, and then suddenly I have a sort of a brilliant idea where inspiration sort of hits us, and we start writing at 100 miles an hour. And is thought leadership like that? Do I just think deep thoughts and then suddenly everything becomes clear? No, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that at all. And so I would say to you that my thought leadership journey, if you like, was that I worked in numbers. Farouk said that I worked as an economist, and before I ever did words, and yes, that's true. And I used to sort of do econometric modelling at the Bank of England, and I found that I started writing about the numbers because I realised that nobody really understood what the numbers meant. Also, I realised that people weren't persuaded just by numbers alone, and that, but what they were persuaded was by a cracking story. And I went from that. I started to enjoy the words as much as the numbers, and so I moved and I became a journalist. And over on the left there, you can see a title called Management Today here in the UK. And
hello, Trevor.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting, but
Yeah.
I think while presenting, so
Yeah.
you must have mistakenly drawn it on your presentation, this thing, so you can clear it from there.
I don't know how to do that because I wasn't doing anything at the time. So
the paper might have done it.
Right. Okay. Shall I stop the share and then restart?
No, you can just I think on this.
Yeah. How do I get rid of that?
You can see at the bottom.
Yeah.
Annotation there. So yeah, just go ahead and clear it. So there might be some clearing this thing.
There's a
you can clear
erase all.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not highlighted though. Okay. Oh, do I just go like that? No. Okay. If I come out of the share and I go back in, will it allow me? Will it start again?
You can try that.
Okay, I'll try that because it looks a bit of a mess at the moment. Okay. So, oh, hang on, what happened there? Just as I was, I'm not sure what happened there. So, right. Okay, so you can see it without.
Yeah. Now it's fine.
That's fine. Okay, right. I was wondering what was going on there. Management Today, I edited a magazine. I was deputy editor on a magazine called Management Today. And we used to get lots of stories in, surveys in, sorry. And those were full of numbers. And I suppose as a journalist, a lot of other journalists who don't really like numbers very much ran away from the surveys, and I ran towards them because of my numbers background. And one of those was around a thing that we're all familiar with now, was about work-life balance. And this was the magazine and the time in the mid-1990s where people started to talk about work-life balance as a result of, the survey that appeared in Management Today. And suddenly the term became very popular. And I realized at that point the power of thought leadership in sort of changing, in shaping the narrative. If I bring that down there, you'll see that another magazine I was involved with was HR magazine. And what happened there was that there were lots of other things that became related to the people space where we started to coin lots of terms around employer branding. Again, these weren't our terms. We didn't invent these terms, but we helped to sort of popularize them along the way. If I click there. Okay, so I'm not going to spend very long on this because we've already talked about, what is thought leadership, and I talked about the origins in the 19th century and development, and the fact that it went a bit out of fashion because it was kind of an overused used term. But what I would say now is that it's very much back in fashion, and I'm going to give you some stats here that I won't go on too long about. I'm not going to fill this presentation with number, but this is one which is interesting, which is about 84% of businesses outsource content creation. Now, that's really great news for people like me, of course, and maybe for those out there who are also involved in the sort of the content area. But I would be the first person to admit, however, that many businesses do not need to or to do outsource as much content as they think, and at least could do it less often if they were better organized in the way they organize their content. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. 79% see thought leadership papers as the most effective the most effective long form content. Again, I'm particularly pleased about this stat because I write thought leadership content, but it's important, and particularly in these times. And once you've got a thought leadership paper, then actually it almost provides the sort of focal point for a lot of other things. If you've got a big think piece, then you can say, well, that's a blog within that, or we can turn that into a video, or we can make that into a podcast. It provides more and more the sort of central starting point for a lot of, once you've got your thinking clear around a subject, then a lot of the other content production becomes a lot easier. So 90% say repurposing content is more effective. It's the flow, the stream that happens as a result of your original thought leadership. A few numbers about business, and this is about post-pandemic business, and this explains why thought leadership is so important. That we were talking when Farouk and I were talking before, that only 1 in 5 B2B buyers want to go back to the old ways of buying. Things have changed a lot. A lot of things have moved online. That more surprisingly, perhaps 3 in 4 business-to-business sellers now say that selling online is at least as effective as the old ways. And most importantly, buyers and sellers all think that the new models are here to stay, that we're going to see more remote selling, more of this kind of thing, the like presentation that I perhaps wouldn't have been able to make, sort of 12 months ago. And so it's marvelous that, organizations like Taxology have sort of grasped the initiative in those sorts of things. But it means that you've got to find other ways to grab people's attention. And that's why, going back to the stats that I had before, 79% see thought leadership papers as the most effective long form content. We've all had a lot of time to think during this pandemic. And so that's another reason why thought leadership has come back into vogue, is that we're all trying to get a perspective on things that have happened and what it means for our markets and so on. So just a few quick examples, because I don't want to sort of go on too long about this, is that I said at the beginning that thought leadership increases sales. So a little example here is that I work with a business called Green Park. A couple of years ago, we decided to interview about 50 of the world's sort of top retail CEOs. And it was a great privilege for me to sort of talk to a lot of these people. And at that time, it was obvious that retail was starting to change. And we were asking, these CEOs across the world, well, what's going to need to be in the DNA of people like you in about 4 or 5 years' time? And so they said a number of things, which now seem more obvious, that CEOs in retail need to be much more data driven. They need to make decisions in a much more collaborative way and so on. At that time, it wasn't quite so obvious. What's happened in the pandemic is a lot of these things have come true. And if you look at the conclusions of that report, it's actually it's a little bit scary that Green Park were able to sort of bring together all those CEOs and almost like predict the future. And what's happened in terms of sales is that organizations like them have been able to have conversations with new clients as a result of that they have a framework, a way forward for making sure that they're fit for the retailers fit for purpose in a very, very uncertain trading environment. So that's one example. Then you've got examples where thought leadership is used to retain customers. Marvelous organization called Top Employers Institute is I don't know if you've heard of it, but it certifies all the top employers worldwide and to certain standards of people practices. I've only played a very small part in this, but the report on the left is something that I helped to produce in times of great problems, during the pandemic, about when everybody's relocating to work from home. How do you make sure you maintain and increase your humanity as an employer? Now, what happened in the UK, where I sort of largely work with top employers, is that this then provoked a series of discussions and webinars that were really all about asking, the member organisations, well, how are you feeling and what are you doing? And obviously, those members have great benefits in talking to each other and saying and sharing experiences. And there were a number of vehicles that were used, and thought leadership was only one of those. But the important point about this is that people see value in their membership of the Top Employers Institute, and as a result, it's in spite of the uncertainty around what's happening in the world, the Top Employers Institute finds itself in a very good place in terms of retention rates of customers, and there's about 1,700 employers worldwide now who sign up for the certification process. Third one that I mentioned was about building a brand, and an example closer to home for you, sort of, Farouk. In this is all about South Asia, and I worked with the British Council. It's a few years ago now, so maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. The British Council was trying to build a voice around the debate around higher education, and I'm sure a number of you will be very familiar with the British Council. And this kind of worked the other way. It was less a thought leadership report provoking a debate. This was more about a debate, a series of debates and conferences across the South Asia region, which then was brought together in order to produce a set of summaries and conclusions, which we called revolutionary realities. And this was all about what we called the demographic time bomb in further education. And this helped to sort of maintain and build a profile for the British Council in the region to be a central debating point, if you like, for government ministers and leaders in education in that area. So it has a hard-edged commercial use, thought leadership. It's not just about sort of cloudy thoughts and moments of inspiration. This actually helps to drive sales, keep your customers, and raise your brand. Punch above your weight, as Farouk was saying earlier on. So that's why I think it's back in fashion. It's also back in fashion for another reason, and one of those reasons is technology. Now, in just an example, in my field, in sort of journalism and writing, there are loads of platforms. There's fantastic platforms like Taxology. This is another one that I use called Expert File, which is really from a journalistic perspective, right? It puts me in touch with lots of academic experts if I want to sort of source a story and so on. The technology, of course, allows me to do that now. That there's all these hubs and portals. The other way that thought leadership is evolving, and we touched on this earlier, is this thing from me to we. The day of the guru is dying, and I think it's been the death has been accelerated by the pandemic, and we're moving much more towards this thing that I was talking about earlier, about moving from a me to a we culture, that people are instinctively, in some cases, collaborating, or at least if they're not instinctive about it, realizing that that it's in their interest, their mutual survival interests, to collaborate around where they think a particular industry or sector is going. Now, I wanted to be practical in helping the audience out there in terms of starting on their content journey. So I've written that second thing of who, what, why, how, when. And what I mean by that is that there are certain things that you need to ask yourself when you are putting together thought leadership, when you are trying to develop a framework, to make life easier for you, to develop it in the natural flow of your business. These are questions that you should be asking yourself anyway. I'm indebted here to an organization called Genius U. I'll just move that the speaker thing for a second. If I can move that down, there we go. And I'm indebted to them because they have a sort of a square called a wealth dynamics square for entrepreneurs, and I've adapted this, with apologies to them, because it inspired me to ask a different set of questions in terms of content. Certain questions when you're putting together thought leadership, like, who are you serving? What problem do you solve? How do you solve the problem? When is it solved? And mostly, people are very interested in why you're doing this. Do you have a higher purpose around your business? All of these things are useful. You need to be answering at least one, hopefully all, or at least some of these questions when you're putting across thought leadership or any form of content. And a higher purpose in my case, for example, would be, yes, I help people with their content and I get people on the fast track to content confidence. But my big thing about my purpose is that I want to see integrity in content that's produced. And when I've done well in this business, I want to set up what I'm going to call a content integrity foundation to make sure a number of the people in all walks of life at the moment are playing fast and loose with the truth. You can probably think of a few politicians who have done that, in your country or in other countries, and really I'm all about the integrity of content, which is my underlying passion. My business passion is kind of concurrent with that, but the why is very important. Is it interesting in terms of what you're trying to do? So that's another message you could get across. All of those business questions translate into content questions. So who do you serve naturally leads to a more pragmatic question. Content, like, who can you reach? If you're trying to reach a buyer who's like 2 or 3 levels above those that you're currently reaching, then who can you practically reach at the moment? Can you reach the person who has to sell an idea that you're trying to promote to that person? What will you say when you get the chance in the terms that they would understand and make sense to the issues that are crossing their desk? How will you actually go about saying it? Do you know anything about how they want to digest that content? When will you post it? What do you know about what times of day or seasons, or that people are more interested in the sorts of subjects you're wanting to talk to, and the why as well that I mentioned before. So that's the who, what, why, how, and when. And there's another aspect to when, and I'm going to finish now, Farouk, quite soon, but you'll be very relieved to hear that I want to emphasize another aspect of when, which is quite important in terms of timing. All about the timing, that your thought leadership or your content, you've got to get a kind of Goldilocks sort of philosophy around it. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. Now, if I gave you an example off the top of my head, if you were talking about remote working, there's no point now in putting out a piece of thought leadership about how to work effectively from home. We've all been doing it for the last year, and actually we're all experts in this now, and there wouldn't be much of a market in that. So that's after the event. if you're thinking about something that's way off in the distance, when we've got a lot of problems immediately in front of us, say 2025 or 2030, it's quite hard for people to get to grasp the significance of what you're saying or what they should do about that. So I talk about just-in-time thought leadership, where things are just at the edge of your thinking, and you're thinking this is an issue that's actually going to be really important in a month or two, and the significance of that is you probably have all those thoughts about what would make great content or what can I be talking about, and you don't do anything about it. And then you find out in about a month's time that somebody else has done something about it. So if it's there on the fuzzy edge of your thinking at this moment, then write it down somewhere immediately. I have a sort of a notebook that I have, and you'll have all sorts of things on your devices where you just write down those thoughts. And I literally, all these thoughts that I have, that are just on that fuzzy edge of my thinking, I kind of get them out at the end of every week and see if any of them join up with each other. And it's amazing how many times serendipity strikes and you realize that actually what you're thinking might work with another thought or another thought you've heard. And you realize that if that's the case, then you might be onto a winner then in terms of your thought leadership. This is an example of one that I just did recently. And the UK, this had a good outcome, but it was quite difficult to write because the UK and the EU, as I'm sure you all know, were involved in very intensive trade negotiations up until the end of last year. It was on, and then it was off, and then it was on, and then it was off. And then finally, just before Christmas, just when, I and the client were sort of getting ready to, enjoy our Christmas pudding, we found out that the deal was on. What we'd done before, of course, and this is why I'm saying it can fit into the natural flow of your work, is there are a number of things that you can say about the relationship between the UK and the EU, whether or not there is a trade deal that we could say. And then what we did, so we wrote a lot of that paper before we found out whether there was a deal, whether it's a deal or not. And then once it became clear that there was a deal, then we were able to sort of put that deal, what was actually agreed, into the paper, and tinker with some of the conclusions depending on what was done. We didn't have to start the thing from scratch. And this, what I mean is that we already knew a lot of the answers, irrespective of whether there had been a deal. And this came out at the beginning of January. And so it was seen as hopefully just a just-in-time document for businesses when they came back to their desks in January, thinking, what on earth do we do about the UK-EU relationship now? And this document was there to help them. So what I would say is that the time of change, when you're probably not certain about what's going to happen, is, as I was saying to Frug earlier, the best time in many ways to offer an opinion. As long as you are humble, as long as you talk about these things about saying, let's go on a journey together, and not, I know all the answers and I already know where we're going. And the final thing I would say about this is that there are 5 things to keep in mind when you're putting together thought leadership. And I hope this is practical for you, is that who, what, when, where, why thing is define your story. Just be very clear about what you're trying to say, who you're trying to say it to. I never used to be very good at planning, if truth be told, but I've become very, very good at planning because I've realized that if you plan and you plan very carefully, you can predict an awful lot of things that are coming along. And it also means your content calendar almost runs itself after a while because you know what's coming up and you know how to act accordingly. You need to find a central message within your story that you are talking about time after time. Recognize your humility in this, that you are there to start the debate and you might not know all the answers, and to always have a call to action, if you like, as to what people say, well, I agree with everything you've written in this report. What should I do now? And the call to action provides you with the next step. And I suppose my little call to action, just to finish off, Farooq, is that this is where I am on my journey, if you like. For the last year, I've been talking about sort of content audits, blueprints, and this time I'm talking about my do it for you, if you like, service. Later in the year, I'm going to be developing more of a consultancy approach to it and developing a microschool. If you're interested in that, anyone out there, then there's an email address that you can get hold of me on there, or you can just connect with me. I'll be delighted to connect with folk on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter. And that's really it. I mean, maybe if I stop sharing now, it's just where I found out, Farouk, that you're not there, and I've been talking to myself for the last half an hour.
No,
I hope you're there. Oh, you are there. Good. All right. Okay.
listening to you.
Yeah.
Sharing my
Excellent.
bandwidth. Yeah. So some amazing things that you have pointed out, and one of the amazing things was the timing.
Yeah.
So how important it is for a person to be a visionary, or you can see a foresightedness? Is it
Yeah.
very important to become a thought leader?
I think. Well, I would. Before I answer that bit, there's a yes, it is important for people to be a visionary, but we all have different visions. We sort of have different thoughts about what a visionary is.
Yeah.
Now, if you think a visionary as kind of somebody who's kind of going like that and can see far off into the future and is all knowing and all seeing, don't trust that person, because they can't possibly be like that. A visionary, to me, in the world of thought leadership, is somebody who has got a good, well-informed, educated guess about what the future holds, but has these things open as well. The ears that are open, that the world is feeding in information all the time. So it's important to have a vision, yes, but it's important. You think about where you get that vision from. You get it from listening, and you get it from learning. The other thing is that the other sort of thing I would say about your kind of slight tangent to your question is that I think people are a lot more visionary than they give themselves credit for. That a lot of people go, oh, I can't do that content visionary thing. I've got this desk full of chores that I've got to do, and so on. I think we all have our moments of insight, and we all have our moments of brilliance. And it's a question, and the people who we might think of as visionaries are simply those who are better at tapping into those at the moment. That if you have a great idea, then you write it down. If you talk to someone and have an interesting conversation, you think about how it feeds into the network of thoughts you're doing. The great visionaries are really just people who are very good at combining a sense of vision with good organization and skills, and actually thinking, how can I make this work in my content story?
So there are people who, visionaries, when I was talking about, like Steve Jobs, who
Yeah.
can think about the future. He makes something, and then he makes people believe in it.
Yeah. Yeah. He tells a compelling story about it. But Steve Jobs, would have been the first to admit that, he couldn't, he was obviously a character, as they say, but he would be the first to admit that, what was really helping people was not just the vision, but, in his case, the amazing design around the vision. And he got brilliant people around him. And yes, he did have the vision, and he could see far, into the future, but he listened as well to what people were saying about how you need to design, and how you need to, how you need to sort of do that, and the functionality, and so on. He was a flawed genius in many ways, and but he did at least know. And of course, he had two goes at it. His first incarnation at Apple, and then his second. That he was able to come back and probably correct some of the mistakes he might have made at the start.
Definitely. So, what do you think that, as you said, that the concept or the definition of thought leadership is changing? It is becoming more collaborative. So, is it going to continue in the future, or we'll see a turnaround and going back to that guru thing?
I think, there is, for example, there is an irony that here I am, sort of talking to you about, as an expert in the subject of thought leadership, but I'd be the first to admit that I, for example, don't have all the answers, on these things. But what I would say is that in whatever subject that people are talking about, then then I think that there might be a time when we do have still, I think, a sort of hero mentality about us, that if, if one of the sports I'm very keen on, football here in the UK, comes along, we get a new manager in, a Jurgen Klopp or someone, and we treat them as the hero figure, and we think that they've got all the answers and so on. But they have a huge team of people sort of behind them, all the physios and all the reserve team coaches and all the under 23 coaches and the like, and they are part of a machine. And will the guru make a comeback? I think in the media, of which I've been a culpable part, I suppose, that we have been, that we do put people up on the pedestal. Okay, I think that's probably, but you have to look behind the fact that there's going to be a bit of media froth about the heroes, to the reality that we are all heroes, if you like, in our own way, and it's a question of how we fit into the debate and the journey of what we're trying to talk about. I'm not sure if that answered your question. Did it answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Another thing I want to ask you, that in the past, say, 8 to 10 months, we have seen a lot of celebrities, the online celebrities who speak about certain things and certain knowledge base, and people just follow them blindly. So, is this the real trend, or should we ask more questions before believing and following these people?
You should definitely ask more questions. Yes, there's no harm, and just because they can't answer them all, it doesn't mean that you stop following them. Because they might be people that you appreciate, and you might think, well, they're good in that area, but maybe not quite so good. I mean, what I would say, and this is a sort of counterintuitive thing for somebody from the media to say, is that really, for our own good, we shouldn't. We should try and avoid the celebrity culture wherever we can. That I think the best. It's my bias, but I think that the best, most insightful people are the most humble. That are those that aren't actually bigging themselves up, sometimes at the expense of others, but are reasonably humble about it, and are quick to appreciate the contributions sort of made by others. So celebrity culture, I think in some works, like if you're talking about show business, then of course, it feeds off a celebrity culture. I'd say in business, we can have our people that we appreciate and that we look up to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'd say is really just appreciate the more holistic view of thought leadership, that behind every man or woman who's up there, that actually they've probably got a great team of people around them. And what my message, I suppose, to all those in a more everyday situation where they're starting their businesses or they're growing their businesses and they're wondering how their business is going to develop is that make the most of what content and insight and ideas you have in the way that I described, but also reach out, to lots of other people, because they can only add to your knowledge and your expertise, and you can help other people. And the collaboration culture, I think, is here to stay. And whilst you might see some fluctuations, that we might get sidetracked by a bright shiny guru at some stage, I'd say on the whole the trend is very much more towards a collaborative way of thinking, which I think is in the DNA of most young entrepreneurs out there at the moment.
So there are a few questions. I think I'm getting a few questions from.
Okay.
And one of them is asking, what values are most important to you as a leader?
To me personally, right. Okay. Integrity. I mentioned, that one day I would like to start a sort of content integrity foundation. I've been, I'll say this. I've been very disappointed, shall we say, by some of the things that have happened in the political arena, for example. And I don't want to get into a kind of right versus wrong debate about politics in a right or left or whatever sense. But where I think the kind of non-negotiable, as far as I'm concerned, is truth and integrity. Is that what are the actual facts of the matter? So I'd say that's number one. And your integrity shines through by the quality of your thought, if you like. That if you are able to demonstrate, in my area, in the thought leadership, that you've actually carefully considered these things, you've considered all the facts, and you might arrive at a completely different conclusion to somebody else who's considered the same facts, and that's okay. But if it's been reached in a way that's full of that's the intention is to integrity rather than to mislead, then that's probably my chief value.
But these days, as we call it as a TikTok generation,
Sorry, say that again.
What we call as TikTok generation.
Yeah.
So these cheap, the technology which is available today,
Yeah.
it's really playing its part, because it's enabling people to become leaders very fast,
Yeah.
and even without integrity. Most of them are without integrity.
Yeah.
So by putting a few videos or putting a few thoughts, they consider themselves as leaders. And the more problematic is the people who follow them.
Mm.
So how should you, as a follower, as a general person, differentiate between the right and the wrong leader?
That's a great question. Well, I suppose I can only talk about the way I do it, because I'm not saying that the way I do it is right or wrong, but the way that I do it is, I'll give you an example. My wife has just recently discovered TikTok, and so she was going through TikTok. She was looking at the videos, and every 5 minutes she said, "Well, this is a load of rubbish. I mean, have people got better things to do with their time?" But she kept looking at it, and so 2 hours later, she's still going through all these TikTok sort of videos. But if you asked her now, what she was looking at yesterday, she might struggle, because she was looking at so many things that really used to talk about people having 15 minutes of fame, and if you're lucky now, it's 15 seconds of fame. And I'd say the thing that the thought leaders to look to, if you like, are those whose ideas actually somehow work their way below the superficial and work their way into your subconscious in some way, so that you start to use their thoughts on a daily basis. That we all have little phrases that we say to ourselves about sort of the way we should behave, or the way we should go about our business, and so on. And if we think about it, those are our inspirations that somehow got below the skin and actually now stay within. And those are the thought leaders that we should be following. We might have a bit of instant gratification and I don't mean to have a go at TikTok here, because I think TikTok's marvelous in other ways, but the instant gratification that you can't remember 2 days later, then to me, those are not the ones to follow. They might have given you a brief moment of entertainment, but they're not thought leaders as far as I'm concerned.
So tell us about our audience, who are basically the young guys. They are on the verge of becoming professionals, or already they have become professionals, and they're joining the workforce right now.
Yeah.
So how should they develop that leadership quality in themselves?
Okay. I would say that a lot of it begins with belief. Now, you might find that a strange thing to say, because a lot of entrepreneurs that we've both met probably have a lot of belief, but they don't necessarily all have the belief in telling their story, and or joining the dots of their story, or turning their own numbers, or the numbers of their life into a great story. And they probably, what I would say to them is that this is not complicated. What you have to do is just to realize, when you have a moment of insight as a young entrepreneur, and you have a moment of insight into your market, or the person that's in front of you who's saying something deep and profound to you, perhaps, or something that resonates to you, just don't let that little cloud of insight disappear. Grab it and bring it into you, and write it down, or put it onto your device, or like that. And you will find that if you do that, if you get that into a habit on a daily basis, then that's your stepping stone. But you'll realize that pretty soon you have greatly underestimated the level of knowledge and insight you have. And that's allied to all the stuff you're picking up from outside, means that you really do have something to say, have some belief in yourself that you can say that. Then I would say is that content is not a once and for all, once and only use event. That if you have a great idea, things like that, there is no shame in using it more than once. What you're doing is actually you're reinforcing your message in what you're doing. So you can get that out there, but you can use that in lots of different ways. It also shows you have a consistency of thought in what you're doing. And the final thing I would say is that every insight that you intend or do you plan to use for your content, think about how you're going to do that. Do you have a content calendar? Do you have a plan for actually using it that coincides with so what your business wants? If you're wanting to launch a particular product or event or so on, what content are you going to actually use that? And you will find that when you know what's coming up, it's amazing how suddenly an email pops into your inbox and which has something to do with that very subject. It might be a speaker for the event that you're trying to organize or is like that. And it's the law of attraction, if you like. When you're actually in the frame of mind and you know what's coming up, how often do things come along? I have a positive mindset around those things, that I think that actually, if your mind is receptive to something, then it sort of appears. And sometimes it's hard work finding those things, sometimes it's not, but they do tend to appear more often. So I would say, as an entrepreneur, have belief in your content and knowledge, apply yourself daily to embrace the insights that mean something to you. You can use it more than once. And there's no shame in doing that, and make it part of your daily business life, because when you've got it's part of your planning mechanism, then content very soon becomes very easy and enjoyable. My big mantra is that I'm here to have fun, yes, make money, but do good, through content. And I think that everyone out there in that audience can do the same if they apply themselves to it, and it becomes a lot of fun. I do it because it's fun.
And you help people, you can say, devising the content, creating the content.
Yeah, that's what I do. The thing that gives me a great kick, if you like, is I love to listen to people's business stories and the way they've tried to use content in the past. And the chief aim of that is to really listen to their story and then see if I can help them tell the story in a better or different way. And that's what I get my buzz out of, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, that's amazing thing. So tell us about any experience of yours, a story that you have heard and then you have developed and that has really helped that person out there.
Well, there's lots of stories in terms of businesses. I actually quite like it in terms of, aside from my content work, I also mentor young entrepreneurs. And so I do that as it's not the main part of my content business. But, for example, I don't want to name them because I haven't got their permission to sort of to name them, but somebody who very recently I was helping in terms of a coaching business that they were setting up. And their whole thing was around unlocking the potential, of the people that they were talking to. So here I am mentoring somebody who is a coach, and what I was helping them with was in terms of helping them get their messages straight. They had too many messages, and they were trying to say too many things at the same time. And I just reduced it down to certain things about how I could help them sort of unlock the potential of their clients in their business. So that was something that I think actually helped. That business has now sort of grown and developed, and that's, I guess that's what I'm all about, helping them see the commercial value of the content, but also it gives them a kind of spiritual value as well, because it helps them sort of unlock their purpose if you like, around the duties. Because if, well, you know, you'd have heard that if you know your purpose, then you don't really feel like it's work. So because you've got a mission, you've got a passion about it.
So we can sum it up by saying that to be a leader, firstly, you should have a thought. And secondly, you should be able to convey that thought. The communication part, the content comes in that communication part. And that's equally important for people to realize and appreciate your thought, right?
Yeah, I would love to tell you. You remember, you know, those slides where I had the, you know, me frowning and then me having the idea and frowning and having the idea. I'd love to tell people that I have these brilliant ideas and it's all inspiration and things like that. It's not. It's about 90% perspiration and having the right thing. And yes, with a few good ideas and a few thoughts, yes, you know, you can make an awful lot out of that if you know the right mechanics around doing that. So it's actually, rather than 90% inspiration, it's actually 90% perspiration with about 10% inspiration. So I'd say that anyone can do this, you know, but they just have to apply themselves and want to make the most of themselves and their insight and knowledge.
Yeah. So what do you think is the key takeaway of today's program, and which people should take with them and always remember and try to apply in their professional lives?
I would say that every business and individual that's out there sort of watching this, I think they should view what I call content confidence as a right for all, not a privilege for a few. There's not just a few of us, you know, who sort of think deep thoughts and come out with insightful things. This is a right, not a privilege. And the takeaway I would say is that just make the most of what's in, you know, hopefully with a few of the tactics that I've sort of talked about today, because it will make a huge difference to how you come across in your business and how you sell yourself, because you want to be in a position where you're selling without really having to make any effort. And content, in my opinion, sort of plays a correctly delivered and, you know, plays a very large part in that. So the other thing I'd say is good luck to everyone, and I'd love to hear your stories.
Yeah. So that was fantastic webinar, Trevor, and we really enjoyed talking to you. We had a wonderful conversation. And I would like all the participants or the people who are watching this live and who will watch this later on our YouTube channel, connect with Trevor. He has already given his LinkedIn address, so you can connect with him. You can connect with Taxology Talks, and we'll be calling a lot of such great leaders, or the future leaders, we can say, on our program, and have them here, share their insights, share their stories with all of you, so that you can learn a lot from them and really excel in your own professional careers. So thanks all of you for watching us today. Thanks, Trevor, for joining from you in the morning, early morning. Have a good breakfast and enjoy your day.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.